Picture this for a moment. After several weeks, maybe even months of total silence, your phone suddenly lights up. A single notification appears on the screen. One short message, one familiar name. The same person who once left you emotionally exhausted now suddenly seems to want access to your life again. Before you answer, before your emotions begin making the decision for you, there is something you need to understand clearly. Their message may not be random, their return may not be accidental, and the way you respond right now can completely change what happens next. In fact, what happens after you receive that message may surprise you more than you expect. If you have ever dealt with someone who disappears from your life and then suddenly returns as if nothing ever happened, pay close attention, because understanding this moment can save you from months or even years of emotional confusion and unnecessary pain. When someone like this finally reaches out after a long silence, the first thing you need to recognize is simple. They may not be coming back because they suddenly discovered your true value. They may not be reaching out because they gained deep emotional awareness or finally developed genuine regret. And they certainly did not become a completely different, healthier, more self-aware person overnight. In many situations, this kind of person returns because they want something. And what they want is emotional supply. That supply can appear in many different forms. It could be your attention, your validation, your admiration, your emotional reaction, your sympathy, your curiosity, or simply the comfort of knowing that they can still reach you whenever they decide to. Their silence was not necessarily about giving you peace, and their return is not automatically evidence of growth, love, or real change. Their actions may be connected more to their own emotional needs than to your well-being. And this is where things become important, because if you understand the pattern, you stop reacting blindly. You start seeing what is really happening. People who behave this way often repeat the same emotional cycle. Silence becomes one part of that cycle. When one source of attention stops feeding their need for validation, when life starts feeling empty or boring, when they lose a sense of control somewhere else, or when the attention they are currently receiving no longer feels satisfying, they may begin looking backward. They start remembering people they once affected emotionally. They revisit old connections, not always because they miss the person themselves, but because they want to find out who is still emotionally available. This is exactly why their message can feel so strange, sudden, and perfectly timed. It may arrive at an unusual hour. It may appear just when you are finally beginning to heal. Sometimes it happens when you have stopped checking your phone, stopped thinking about them, and finally started focusing on your own life again. It can almost feel as though they somehow noticed that your emotional distance was growing. And while there is nothing mysterious about it, people who are focused heavily on attention and influence can become very sensitive to changes in the people around them. They notice when your energy changes. They notice when you stop chasing. They notice when you become less available. Not because they are necessarily deeply connected to your feelings, but because your attention once had meaning to them. This distinction matters. They may not be returning because they miss you as a whole person. They may be returning because they miss what they used to receive from you. They miss the attention. They miss the reassurance. They miss the validation. They miss the emotional access. They may even miss the sense that they could still affect your mood with a single message. And once you understand that, their sudden return starts looking very different. So stay with this, because the next part is where many people make their biggest mistake. What you need to understand is that this kind of return can often be transactional. The message may look innocent. It may be casual. It may sound caring. It might simply say, "Hey, how have you been?" Maybe they send a memory. Maybe they ask a simple question. Maybe they act as if the months of silence never happened. But underneath that small message, they may be testing something much bigger. They may be testing whether emotional access is still available. Are you going to answer immediately? Are you still angry? Are you still curious? Do you still care? Will one message bring your attention back? Your response can give them information. And this is why your reaction matters so much. If you respond warmly, they may receive the emotional reward they were looking for. If you respond with anger, they may still get something valuable from the interaction, because your anger proves that they can still affect you. Even a cold or casual response can sometimes tell them that the door is not completely closed. To someone who values emotional influence, your reaction itself can carry value. Your attention becomes a form of currency. Your emotions become information. Your availability becomes something they measure. This is why some people suddenly return when they sense that this emotional currency is slipping away. They may have been silent for weeks, but the moment they believe you have finally detached, they appear again. And this is the part many people misunderstand. Or they think, maybe they finally miss me. Maybe they finally understand what they lost. Maybe this message means they have changed. But before you create a story around that message, pause. Look at the pattern, not the words. Anyone can send a message. Real change is shown through consistent behavior over time. And that difference can protect you from falling back into the same cycle. Their earlier silence can also fit into this same pattern. Silence can create uncertainty. It can leave you wondering what happened, whether you did something wrong, whether they still care, or whether they will ever come back. During that silence, your mind may keep searching for answers. You may replay old conversations. You may examine every detail. You may wonder why they disappeared without explanation. And while you are doing all of that, part of your emotional attention may still be connected to them. Then, just when you begin to release that connection, the message arrives. Suddenly the questions return, the memories return, the emotions return, your mind starts racing again. Why now? What do they want? Should I answer? What if this time is different? This is why the moment requires awareness, not impulse. You do not have to immediately decide what their message means. You do not have to reward their return with instant access to your emotions. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to observe. You are allowed to ask yourself whether their behavior has actually changed or whether only their timing has changed. That one question can reveal a lot, because someone who genuinely wants to rebuild trust does not simply appear and expect immediate access. They understand that their previous behavior created damage. They take responsibility. They communicate clearly. They respect boundaries. They show consistency. They do not expect you to forget everything because they sent one message. Remember this, because it is one of the most important ideas in this entire conversation. A return is not the same thing as a transformation. Someone coming back does not automatically mean they have changed. Sometimes it only means they want to see whether the old door still opens. And if you can recognize that before responding emotionally, you regain control of the situation. This is also why you should pay attention to what happens after the first message. One message tells you very little. Patterns tell you everything. Do they communicate consistently, or do they disappear again once they get the reaction they wanted? Do they acknowledge the past, or do they avoid every difficult conversation? Do they respect your boundaries, or do they push against them? Do their actions match their words? These are the questions that matter. Do not become so focused on the fact that they return that you forget why they left you emotionally exhausted in the first place. The sudden appearance of their name on your screen can trigger memories faster than logic can respond. That is normal, but you do not have to let that emotional wave make the decision for you. You can breathe, you can wait, you can think, you can observe, you can decide what access this person deserves, if any. And here is something you may not have considered. Your silence does not always need to be broken simply because someone else decides to speak. Their message creates an opportunity for you to choose, not an obligation for you to respond. That distinction is powerful. You are no longer required to explain yourself. You are not required to prove that you have moved on. You are not required to show them that you are angry. And you are certainly not required to reopen a chapter simply because someone suddenly feels like reading it again. If their return brings confusion instead of clarity, pay attention to that feeling. If it brings pressure instead of peace, pay attention. If it immediately pulls you back into an old emotional pattern, that tells you something important. Sometimes the strongest response is not a perfect sentence. Sometimes it is simply refusing to abandon your own peace. So when that notification finally appears after weeks or months of silence, do not rush. Look at the situation from a distance. Ask yourself what has actually changed, not what they promised, not what you hope they mean. Look at what they have consistently done. Ask whether this person is returning with accountability, respect, and genuine consistency, or whether they are simply checking to see if they still have emotional access to you. That question can change everything. Because once you stop measuring their return by how much you still want them and start measuring it by the quality of their behavior, the power of the situation begins to shift. You stop being pulled around by every notification. You stop turning every message into a sign. You stop confusing attention with love and return with growth. Most importantly, you begin protecting the peace you worked so hard to rebuild. And if there's one thing I want you to remember from this entire message, let it be this. Someone returning is not proof that you should let them back in. Their words can open a conversation, but only their consistent actions can show whether they deserve renewed trust. So before you reply, pause. Before you believe, observe. Before you reopen the door, remember why you closed it. Because sometimes the real test is not whether they come back. The real test is whether you have become strong enough to decide what happens when they do. And if you understand that, you may never look at that unexpected message the same way again. When they disappear, it is often because their attention is moved somewhere else. Maybe another person became a more interesting source of validation. Maybe they became busy with their own problems and priorities. Or maybe they use silence as a way to create uncertainty and feel more in control. Whatever the reason may be, that silence often serves their needs in some way. And when staying silent no longer gives them what they want, they return. Their timing can feel strangely perfect, but it is often connected to what they believe they need at that moment. They may reach out when you are feeling emotionally weak, around an important date, or just when you are finally rebuilding your confidence and moving forward. People who behave this way can become uncomfortable when they realize they are losing psychological influence over someone they once had easy access to. So when they suddenly appear again, their motivation may have more to do with themselves than with genuine emotional responsibility or a healthy connection. This is where things become confusing, because the message itself may look completely harmless. It might sound kind, it might sound gentle, it may even contain an apology. But do not focus only on the words you can see. Pay attention to what may be happening underneath them. When someone reaches out after a long period of silence, the message is often not as casual as it appears. It can be intentional and carefully shaped to create a response. They may be watching your emotional state. They want to know whether you still care. They want to find out whether you still react to them emotionally. They want to measure whether you are still reachable on an emotional level. And this is the part you should remember, because the smallest message can sometimes carry a much bigger purpose. A simple, "Hey," or "How are you?" may seem completely normal, but it can also be a way of checking whether you are willing to carry the emotional weight of starting the conversation again. A nostalgic message may be sent to discover whether old memories still have an effect on you. A vulnerable statement such as, "I needed to talk to you," can sometimes be used to find out whether you will place their emotional needs above your own boundaries. Very little may be accidental in these situations. People who repeatedly use these patterns can remember emotional reactions surprisingly well. Over time, they learn what made you soften. They learn what caused you to feel guilty. They learn what made you stay longer than you wanted. They remember what made you explain yourself, chase answers, seek closure, or become emotionally involved again after you had already created distance. Your reactions become part of their mental map, and the message they send can become a psychological tool. The purpose is not always to rebuild the relationship. Sometimes the purpose is simply to gather information. Are you still affected? Do you still think about them? Did their silence hurt you? Is the emotional door still open? Even your hesitation can tell them something. A fast response can suggest that you are still emotionally available. A long emotional explanation can reveal that the attachment may still be there. Even anger can communicate that they still occupy an important emotional place in your mind. Every reaction sends a message. Every response gives them something to interpret. And this is why you need to pay attention to more than the words on the screen. The message may look simple, but the emotional meaning behind it can be much more complicated. Stay with me because this next part explains why your first reaction can matter more than you realize. This is why these messages can carry hidden emotional layers. The words may appear ordinary, but underneath them, they can be designed to reopen old emotional roles. They may bring up a shared memory. They may copy the way you used to communicate. They may suddenly become warm, caring, familiar, or nostalgic. But familiarity should never be confused with emotional depth. Sometimes familiarity is simply being used to activate old feelings. In many situations, silence ends when the person feels they need something again. It could be attention, it could be validation, it could be reassurance, it could simply be emotional access. And the message becomes the first step in finding out whether that access is still available. What matters most may not be how deeply you feel about them. What matters is whether they can still affect what you feel. That is why their sudden outreach can leave you confused. One moment the message seems caring, the next their behavior becomes distant. Then they may become inconsistent, unclear, or subtly controlling. Their communication can revolve around what they need instead of honest, emotional responsibility. Once you recognize this pattern, the entire situation starts to look different. You stop asking only, what do they mean, and begin asking, what are they trying to create with this message? That small change in perspective can protect you. When someone reaches out after months of silence, your first response becomes extremely important. People who follow this type of behavioral pattern may pay close attention to emotional reactions. They notice patterns. They observe timing. They notice tone, hesitation, vulnerability, and every small opening you give them. Your first reply can reveal much more than you think. Whether it is long or short, emotional or neutral, immediate or delayed, it can all be interpreted. And once they understand your reaction, they may decide what approach to use next. If you answer immediately, they may assume you are still emotionally reachable. If you answer with anger, they may still see emotional involvement. If you respond with sadness or openness, they may recognize an opportunity to shape the emotional direction of the conversation. Even a neutral message can reveal more than intended if it contains long explanations, personal feelings, or emotional details. This is another reason their timing can matter. They understand that an unexpected appearance can create a strong psychological reaction. They know people often feel first and think second. A sudden message can bring back memories, loneliness, confusion, pain, or even hope before your logical mind has time to catch up. They may rely on that emotional reflex. If your response shows that they can still disturb your emotional balance, they may feel more confident that access is still available. And there is something else you need to understand. They often pay attention to behavior more than words. Someone can say, "I am completely done," but if their actions still show intense emotional reactions, the behavior may communicate something very different. Your reaction can influence their next move. If you sound hurt, they may suddenly become sympathetic. If you sound angry, they may present themselves as misunderstood or make themselves look like the victim. If you sound hopeful, they may become warmer and more affectionate. If you sound guilty, they may increase the pressure and continue pushing for a response. Your emotional state can become their guide. That is why emotional control is so powerful in this moment. You do not need to prove anything. You do not need to explain everything. You simply need to remain aware of what your reaction is communicating. A calm and steady response can completely change the expected pattern. A delayed answer, a controlled tone, or even no response at all can create a situation they did not expect. And when they cannot easily predict your emotional reaction, their sense of influence can weaken. A calm response removes much of the emotional energy they may have been hoping to receive. It interrupts the script. It changes the dynamic. Suddenly, they cannot rely on the same old reaction they remember. This is where your power begins to return to you. Not through revenge, not through trying to hurt them, not through playing another psychological game, through emotional control and clear boundaries. When someone returns after a long silence, their opening tone is often carefully selected. They usually do not begin with direct aggression. Instead, they may approach through familiarity, kindness, nostalgia, concern, or emotional softness. These approaches can make your defenses come down quickly because they remind you of the person you once knew. They may sound thoughtful, they may suddenly appear caring. They may speak as if the painful history between you never happened, and that can be powerful because familiarity feels safe even when the pattern was not. So before you respond, slow down. Ask yourself what has actually changed. Has their behavior changed, or have their words simply become softer? Are they taking responsibility, or are they trying to restart the old connection without addressing what happened? Are they respecting your boundaries, or are they testing how quickly you will return to your old role? These questions matter, and if you keep listening, you will see why one unexpected message should never be allowed to erase months of evidence. The most important thing is to stop judging the situation by the emotional intensity of the moment. A message can make your heart race. A familiar name can bring back years of memories in seconds. But emotional intensity is not proof of emotional truth. You can feel something strongly and still choose not to act on it. You can remember the good moments and still remember why you needed distance. You can care about someone and still decide that access to your life is no longer healthy for you. That is not cruelty. That is awareness. When they reach out, you do not have to immediately decide whether they're good or bad, changed or unchanged. You simply need to observe. Watch what happens after the first message. Do they remain consistent? Do they communicate clearly? Do they accept responsibility for their past behavior? Do they respect your boundaries when you say no, or do they become distant again once they receive the reaction they wanted? The answers will tell you much more than the opening message ever could. Remember, anyone can send a few warm words. Anyone can sound sorry for a moment. Anyone can bring up an old memory. But genuine change requires consistency, accountability, patience, and respect over time. Do not let a few sentences erase an entire pattern. This is where many people lose their clarity. They become focused on what the person is saying right now and forget what the person repeatedly did before. But your history contains information. Your experience contains information. Your emotional response contains information too. You do not need to ignore any of it just because the person has returned with a softer tone. And if this message has appeared in your life recently, take a breath before doing anything. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to think. You are allowed to protect your peace. Most importantly, you are allowed to decide whether this person still deserves access to you. The return of someone from your past does not automatically create an obligation to reopen the door. Their decision to contact you is theirs. Your decision to respond is yours. Those are two completely different things. You do not owe immediate access simply because they suddenly feel ready to speak. You do not have to explain why you moved on. You do not have to prove that you are stronger now. And you do not have to respond with anger just to show that you are finished. Sometimes the healthiest response is simply emotional distance. Sometimes it is a short, neutral answer. Sometimes it is no answer at all. The right choice depends on your situation, but one principle remains important. Do not let their urgency become your urgency. If they suddenly want your attention, that does not mean you must suddenly give it. If they suddenly want answers, that does not mean you must provide them. If they suddenly want closeness, that does not mean you must reopen your emotional world. You have the right to move at your own pace. And when you stop reacting from fear, guilt, loneliness, or hope, you can finally make a decision from clarity. That is the real shift. Their message may be unexpected, but your response does not have to be. You can choose calm. You can choose patience. You can choose yourself. So if that familiar name appears on your screen after weeks or months of silence, do not immediately ask, why did they come back? Ask something even more important, what do I want now? Then look at their actions, look at the pattern, look at the way you feel after interacting with them. Because the goal is not to win the interaction. The goal is to protect your peace. And once you understand that, their sudden return loses much of its power. You are no longer waiting for them to decide what happens next. You are the one deciding.